Welcome to Circle Back to You podcast. I'm your host, Jason Wilson. Our guest today is Johan Tocre, neuroscience-based life coach. He's passionate about prevention work in the field of mental health, which includes suicide prevention and intervention, and working with individuals seeking positive change in their lives through a shift in mindset. Hello, everybody. I'm your host, Jason Wilson. We're here with Johan Tocre. Happy Wednesday. Hope everybody's week is going great so far. Today, we're going to be talking about the neuroscience of motivation. Interesting topic, brother. When we thinking about that topic, I reflect on the Atlanta Falcons and their performance this past weekend and all this season. Starting out with Kirk, uh, our
Cousins.
Kirk Cousins, our quarterback, man. Everybody thought him switching over to the Falcons with the injury to his Achilles and his age and everything, he wasn't worth the money. But he's found a switch in his motivation and mindset, which is, put him at peak performance all season long, which basically has shocked the league. And I'm sure everybody on his team is in his corner, all the city of Atlanta as well. But then we took a look at what happened this past Sunday with Yo with Koo, our kicker. Man, he missed 4 field goals. One was blocked, but the other 3 were just basically missed. What happens to a player like that who basically practices all season long to make these kicks seem, normal to everybody else, but when you're under pressure, you just completely miss it. What happens in that case?
Yeah, there's so many factors that come into play on that, man.
Yeah,
Because you are practicing the whole week, and then you feel this kind of like sudden pressure, and then it tends to like you second guess yourself. Because I watch the games on just the facial expressions, the posture of the kickers going in. When the special team sends their team out there, they look very confident. Sometimes they look in their eyes, and then if you notice when the ball is snapped, right, and the holder's gonna take the ball, that 0.5 second delay makes a big difference. And in them second guessing themselves, they delay their takeoff in order to go towards the ball and flex the knee and getting ready to boot that ball, and then they lose their concentration. They lose their sight, the direction of where they're heading. They change their body posture at the last second because they delayed, and then the ball just goes elsewhere, hits a post, goes wide right, wide left, or it gets blocked.
yeah, absolutely, man. So we're going to delve into this topic. I'm going to let you do your thing, and let's get into it.
All right, so one of the things that I'm going to do is, Jason, I'm going to share my screen here because I do have a PowerPoint. This is such an important topic that I wanted to make sure that I don't miss anything, and that I include the most important information. So I'm going to share this, and then I'll explain what we're going to be doing basically and how we're going to go about this topic. All right, so there it is. And let me know, guys, if you're able to see the screen. It should say the Behavioral Neuroscience of Motivation. All right. So are we good, I guess? All right, perfect. All right. So we're gonna go over the behavioral neuroscience of motivation. And Jason, I like how you introduced this topic. Speaking about football, yeah, we're kind of like in mid-season. Just last week or a couple of weeks ago, it was the Yankees against the Sox, right? And or the Dodgers. I mean, not the Sox. The LA Dodgers against the Yankees, and everybody was kind of like wondering how in the world the Yankees performed throughout the season, and then in the last game they just got blown out. Basically, what happened to those players? At the same time, we go to the NFL and we find that situation, yeah, with with Kirk Cousins, and then the kicker, and then we look at the Dallas Cowboys, which is one of my favorite teams. Well, actually, it is my favorite team, and then I wonder, what in the world happened to where the team was? They were building the team, they made the playoffs, and it seems, at least for now, that this season is going to be they're going to miss the playoffs. You know, or then what happens when they go past the wild card round, and then the team tends to like underperform when it really matters. So what happened to all those players? What happens to the young players like Zach Wilson at the New York Jets? It was such a promise, and then all of a sudden now he's like a third stringer for I can't forget what team he went to, but what happened to that kid straight out of college? Performed well. I was at one of the games between the Jets and the Buffalo Bills where he actually led the Jets into beating the Bills at MetLife Stadium. And then what happened? And now you have the difference between Kirk Cousins and then Aaron Rodgers, right? He's also in his late 30s, and people thought that he was going to make a big difference in the Jets and take him to the playoffs. But then what happened now? He got injured, and then what's happened is lack of motivation, or what is it? So we're going to look at all that. So I'm glad that you introduced the topic with that those examples. And for the last one, MLS, Inter Miami, they have the best player, allegedly the best player in the world, right? Lionel Messi, and they just missed the playoffs. What happened there? All right, so let's look at this behavioral neuroscience of motivation. Well, first and foremost, we're gonna look into the intro and what sets the background for this topic. So in terms of sports, and I decided to do motivation um, or neuroscience of motivation mainly in sports because sports is comprised of many different aspects on the human self, right? It's the mind, the body, the spirit, what drives and all that. So it's not all by your physical endurance or prowess, right? It's influenced by psychological and then the neurological processes that drive that motivation. And when I say young athletes, I don't only mean, I'm not just meaning kids, I'm meaning like, 21 years and younger, or, the young adults, 25 and younger. And so there's that interplay between like motivation, decision making, and discipline. All those three things need to work together in order to achieve that peak performance. And then I'm also going to shed some light on how motivation operates in the brains of these athletes and, the implications basically. All right, so let's start by, first of all, looking at what exactly is motivation, or how is it defined. So for one, it is complex. It's not just one region in the brain. It's kind of like a network. There's also intrinsic and extrinsic factors. Like the intrinsic one is you know what gives us that personal satisfaction and enjoyment in whatever we do. I'm using sport as the example because this is a theme, but in anything we do, right? What drives us for that personal satisfaction? And then the extrinsic one, influenced by external rewards, like am I going to get praise? Am I going to get validation? Am I going to get trophies? What is my reward? When I let that intrinsic motivation play a role in what I want to do. So I'm going to cite there was a study published in 2020 by the journal Psychology, and it highlights that the young athletes who exhibit high levels of intrinsic motivation, they tend to demonstrate greater resilience and persistence in training, and that makes them more likely to excel. So we got to remember that even when we're playing sports or trying to join a team, right? The idea of being in a professional sport, like, oh man, I want to make it to the NFL or to Major League Baseball or to MLS or to any other professional thing, we want to be there and we want to perform. But then it's a whole different story when we actually join it and we have to go through the training. We got to wake up early. We can't be talking to friends because we're highly concentrated, especially if you're going to compete in a championship, right? The external distractors, right? You got to get rid of them. Sometimes you may wake up in the morning feeling like hell and you really don't want to go train, So what do you do when that happens? What do you do when your idea of wanting to play professional sports turns into a reality, and you figure out that it's not as simple and easy as you thought it would be, right? It's a whole different thing when you join that team. So we're going to look into that. So this is basically motivation, right? Intrinsic, extrinsic. Now we're going to look at the brain reward system. So I'm going to show you guys kind of like the neuroanatomy of everything, and then we're going to go into behavior, and then at the end I'm coach or a mentor that's watching this episode today some tips on how you can get your athletes to enhance their intrinsic motivation. Okay. All right. So, in terms of the brain's reward system, um, as I mentioned before, it's not just one area. It's complex, and it's basically a network. Um, so I'm gonna show you guys a graphic and kind of like touch a little bit on what that network involves. But for instance, there was a research conducted that found that when young athletes engage in activities that they find enjoyable, their brains release dopamine, and that reinforces the behavior and enhances the motivation. Now, that's important to note, because not every athlete is going to have the same or find the same type of joy in the activities that other people do. And that's one thing for coaches to keep in mind, that when you have a group of people together coming and working towards the same goal, you got to be able, and I'm going to quote basically the motto of the non-commissioned officers in the Army, which is what I am. When I work with my soldiers, I had to provide the following in order to accomplish a mission: purpose, direction, and motivation. And that's what, as a coach, you got to be able to provide your players, because everyone is different and everyone is going to find joy. Not everyone's going to find the or have the extrinsic motivation in achieving the trophy. It's going to be about the journey to get there, and that's what the intrinsic motivation is. It's what joy are they going to have personally in getting to that ultimate goal of winning the Super Bowl, or getting a trophy or an award. So it's important to remember that, it's about activities that your athletes find joy. And in terms of that, you got to know your athletes, and you got to know who you're working with, and you got to know what they like, you got to know what they dislike, and then you take all that information and you put it together into a training plan that's going to allow them to achieve that peak performance that you're looking for as a coach or as a mentor. So, as I'm mentioning, when that athlete experiences that, you have dopamine release, so they feel reward, they feel that feel good, I just did this. So the biochemical response, it does not only boost motivation, but it also influences the decision making, as athletes are more likely to choose activity that provide immediate rewards. But then again, we got to have a balance, because we're not always going to get that immediate reward. I'm just mentioning this because this is what how we work, how our reward systems work, and we got to balance it out. Like, we gotta know and have the discipline to work towards a goal and not expect always that immediate reward, but it's kind of like a journey. So that's what the brain reward system. Now we're going to go over the neuroanatomy of that reward system. And there's this network that it's called the cortical ventral basal ganglia, or BG for short. Now, in terms of the reward, in terms of the motivation, what I'm talking about, this is where we're going to look into the brain, which I think it's also important that if you're in that field of training and coaching and all that, you gotta know how the brain works, so that you get that information and you apply it, to the benefit of your athletes and to yourself as a coach, so you can have your athletes grow also. So, for one, it is the key component to rational decision making. This is extremely important. The key component to rational decision making and appropriate goal directed behavior is the ability to evaluate reward value, predictability, and the risk accurately. Extremely important to the young athletes, because if a young athlete doesn't have much experience in life, and we're talking about athletes that start from middle school, going to high school, going to college, and then to a professional team, all they know is going to school, studying, make the grade, get a scholarship, go into a draft, and then make it to a professional team. So they don't have that live experiences that maybe other athletes have, that they went into professional sports at a later age. Now they have experience. Most of these young athletes, they need to learn how to properly evaluate the reward value. In other words, is the action that they're engaging in towards an outcome, is it worth their time and effort? Can they accurately predict that if they do this, they're going to get to point A, B, and C? And can they assess the risk accurately. And this is why sometimes we see athletes um, engaging in a very reckless behavior. They don't have that skill of being able to properly evaluate the reward value or know how to assess the risk accurately. Another thing, assessing the likely outcomes from different choices effectively. That's another key point in terms of motivation and reward. If we get that skill of knowing how to assess the likely outcome from the different choices that we make um, effectively, we will most likely have a very positive outcome from the effort and the actions that we engage in towards that particular goal. So those two things are key, right? Um, Again, ability to evaluate the reward value, predictability, and risk accurately, and then of course assess the likely outcomes from different choices effectively. So this BG, the cortical ventral basal ganglia, right? It works in concert with cortex um, areas. So this is what the basal ganglia is. I'm not sure if you can see my little mouse pointer going in circles around it, but this is the basal ganglia. You're not going to see it on the surface because it's deep, very deep inside the brain, but it doesn't work alone. It works with a network of other regions, and that's important to understand. Sometimes we think that when we talk about anything related to behavior, that it's only one part of the brain, and the brain doesn't work like that. The brain works with networks, a combination of all different things working at the same time, simultaneously, and in synchrony in order to make things happen. So here we have the frontal and prefrontal cortices, and this usually has to do with decision making and everything. And then we have the somatosensory cortex and the primary motor cortex, and this basically takes all the different stimuli that we have externally and we interpret it. So everything is important. The environment that we're going to find ourselves in as we make this journey, for example, from amateur um, sports to professional sports, is important. Where our environment, what environment we find ourselves in. Okay. So again, the BG works with all different cortices and in concert and synchronicity, or in synchrony, not synchronicity. Synchronicity is something else. All right, let's look at the basal ganglia. As I mentioned, the basal ganglia is a group of brain structures. So you have all these different things working together, and this is why I said that you can't really see the basal ganglia on the surface because it's really deep inside the brain. But I'll share with you guys what the basal ganglia does. So it works with motor control. So it's kind of like the gatekeeper for initiating movement, and it really helps you select which actions to allow and which to inhibit. Which is, I mean, interesting, right? It's like one little piece of the brain can determine what you consider as actions that you're going to do or not do, right? And then everything else is involved as well. There's also cognitive functions. So cognitive functions mainly come from the frontal cortex right here. You got executive decision making, so they play a role in executive decision making, reward and aversion, emotional stimulation. And aversion means basically, what you dislike. So it helps you make those decisions based on what you like and what you dislike. Also in language learning, and then in working memory, and I'm going to touch on what working memory is, and also some, what affects working memory and what are some examples of it. And then, of course, in learning. So it plays a role in learning. All right, let's take a look at working memory. So, for one, working memory is the ability to hold and manipulate information in the mind over a short period of time. What I mean by that, think about when you got to remember information. That can be somebody gives you a phone number and you're dialing a phone number. You got to be able to keep that information short term in memory so you can be able to execute actions linked to that. Following directions, hey, go over there, make a right when you see the light, things like that. Or think about in sports. A coach is speaking to the athlete and is giving them directions. Hey, when we execute this play, we're going to do a blitz. I need you to run this way. I need you to pressure this way. I need you to go run to the whatever yard line, turn around. The ball will be right there, whatever. So you got to be able to follow directions and keep that in mind for a short period of time. Paraphrasing is another type of working memory because it shows that you're understanding what the other person is saying and you're being attentive. So it stays with you for that short period of time. And then, of course, responding in conversation because you're able to retain the topic that the person you're talking to is bringing forth, right? So those are examples of working memory. What damages working memory? Well, traumatic brain injury. If you have an injury and it affects part of the basal ganglia or some of the other structures in the brain that serve as the network in the basal ganglia, it's going to probably affect it. Think of all the different examples of athletes that um, get traumatic brain injury. For example, MMA fighters, boxers, baseball players, if the ball hits them in the head, um, football players, right? One of the uh, earliest examples or latest examples is uh, the Miami quarterback Tua. Uh, I think a some article came out. One of the players there mentioned that Tua called him by the wrong name, and so he's saying that he's gonna protect himself more, a little bit more, in order to prevent that kind of damage, and that's something serious. So that can definitely um, affect your working memory. Information overload. If you are working with athletes and you're throwing information, too much information in one single episode, it's going to overload them and they're not going to be able to retain. So if you're a coach watching this, one tip is to be able to separate information and give it in small bunches so that your athletes can actually retain it and don't just hit them with everything. This not only works in terms of like athletes but also in relationships. Imagine your spouse, wife or husband, just telling you, hey, you blah 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 blah. They just overload you with all this information, and then they ask you something, you're looking at them like you're in the headlights because you couldn't retain more than just one sentence, right? So working memory also works in effective communication. So make sure that you don't overload with information the person that you're talking to. Distractions. If you have any distractions, of course, you're not going to be able to retain much of what is being said to you or what is being shared with you as working memory. Stress, because of the neurochemical interactions, is going to probably prevent you from being able to retain memory. And then, of course, if you have any mental health issues, that can also impair your working memory. And then time constraints. Look, if you're trying to prepare um, for a conference with only 10 minutes left for you to go in there and you haven't prepared before, you have all this information that you got to share, more likely you're not going to be able to retain much as working memory. So if you have something like that, you got to allow yourself the time to prepare. This is what happens a lot of times too in sports, whether the athletes, they have to prepare and they procrastinate until the last 2 days before game or anything like that, and now they have to remember the different plays that they got to execute. It's going to affect their working memory. They're probably not going to retain. You can see it in the plays too, yeah, especially in football. You see a quarterback throwing the ball towards the sideline, and then the receivers running toward the center, and they're like, what the heck happened? They're probably trying to push too much information during that play, and so it causes confusion and you're not able to retain the information that you have to. So that takes care of the neuroanatomy, okay, of the basal ganglia, right, the network, and then working memory, which I think is pretty important in this topic. So another thing is, how does motivation um, impact or affect when it comes to decision making and discipline? So for one, decision making process in young athletes is significantly influenced by their motivational states. Remember, when we're talking about young athletes, we're talking about from middle school to high school to college and then even in professional sports. So motivation will definitely impact their decision making, which is why I mentioned that you gotta know how to, communicate with your athletes and find out what motivates them intrinsically, so you can make that as part of the training plan. So high motivation often correlates with greater ability to make quick strategic decisions during competitions. There's a study in 2023, just last year, that demonstrated that motivated young athletes tend to show improved decision making skills even under pressure, leading to better performance outcomes. That's something important to consider, because when you're trying to, as a mentor or as a coach, and you're trying to help this young athlete forge themselves into a um, um, positive, uh, contributing member of society once they're outside of sports, you can, there that discipline and decision making can be affected by how you communicate with them and how you conduct your training sessions, and what are the things that you're talking to him or her about that can help them get these skills. Because after sports, they have to live a regular life. When they come out of training, they have to live a regular life. They have to go into decision making. Um, who's going to be in the relationship, who they're starting a relationship with, what house are they going to buy, what things they can invest on, um, how to start new relationships, into relationships with should they go to school or not, are they trying to get a different job or not. So all those things impact a young athlete that starts in pro sports, and they get injured. You got to remember, they know nothing other than the sport that they've been investing all their time on. So when they can't play that sport any longer, they're not going to have any experience in life. So that kind of motivation, that intrinsic motivation, will play a big role in their decision making and the discipline. Um, Also remember, when we wake up and we don't have that drive, when those athletes don't have that drive, what is going to keep them going, even though they may not feel like they want to train, their knees are tired, their body is tired, they feel hungry, or anything like that, it's going to be the discipline. Discipline is what's going to keep that person committed into achieving that goal when motivation is low. And as coaches or mentors, if we find that that athlete doesn't have the intrinsic motivation, then we got to find something that's extrinsic, so that we can help that person get motivated for that. So, and in order for us to do that, it takes us knowing our athletes, not only in the pitch, but outside of it as well. What drives them, what they like, if they have family members, they have kids, things that may be affecting them, things that may be affecting their mental health. And you see it translated into poor performance on the field. So it's not only going to be about calling out their poor performance, it has to be about, what caused that poor performance, coming from that athlete, and trying to get to the root of it. All right. Again, discipline is an essential component of athletic success, closely tied to motivational factors. So young athletes who are intrinsically motivated are more likely to adhere to training regimens and maintain a disciplined approach to the sport. Not everyone's going to like the kind of training, right, that the coach has in the field, but you got to work together in order to achieve the same goal. So if you have that discipline, even though you may not feel that drive to want to do that same training over and over again, right? If you have that intrinsic motivation, you are most likely to adhere to that training regimen. It works the same in the military. We got to do all these different drills time after time after time. If you're in the infantry, you're going to be doing these drills time after time after time. You're shooting at no one. You got to prepare for battle. You got to conduct all these different drills, and it just gets tiring. So you got to find that intrinsic motivation to get going. And the good platoon sergeant, or your good first line squad leader, or your non-commissioned officer in charge will provide that purpose, direction, and motivation. Okay. Um, So then there was another 2024 study this year. Disciplined athletes, they exhibit higher levels of self-control and focus, which are critical for long-term success. Um, and I think just in this football season alone, I can mention a few of the athletes that have not really exhibited high levels of self-control and focus. But it would be unfair to mention their names. But you can see the ones that have that self-control and ones that don't have that self-control that tend to get in trouble, right, with the law, and they make a name for themselves. Instead of high performance on the field, they make a name for themselves because of the things that they did wrong. All right, so self-discipline is often reinforced by positive feedback from coaches and peers, creating a cycle of motivation and achievement. That is exactly, you know, when you're a coach or a mentor, you want to give that positive feedback and not only focus on their poor performance if they perform poorly, of course, right? You got to help them. They already know, for one thing, that the athlete already knows that they didn't perform well. So it's kind of unnecessary to go to that person and kick them when they're down and tell them, hey, you didn't perform so well today, but rather, you know, kind of like focus on the things that went well so that person can start picking themselves back up and intrinsically motivate themselves to continue going. um, I saw this in this past game when the Dallas Cowboys played against, gosh, I forgot what team it was. I guess I blocked it out of my mind because my team was sucking. But you had their second string quarterback, because of Dak Prescott is out with an injury. You had the second string quarterback, Cooper Rush, go and play, and unfortunately, he didn't perform so well. So now they had this young kid going in for him, and they put him in for 3 plays, and then they pulled him out. Now, how do you think that young kid feels? And I'm saying kid, but he's in his 20s, But how do you think that young athlete feels after going into the field um, to perform better and then gets pulled out because he knows he didn't perform as well? And then they put the other quarterback in, and then the other quarterback doesn't perform as well, and then they take him out and they put the young the young quarterback in again. So these kind of things play through your psyche, right? It's not the best feeling. It's almost like saying, you're not performing well, let's get the other guy in. Oh, that guy didn't perform well either, let's take him out, let's put you back in and give you another shot and see what happens. It's kind of like not the best ways to manage that situation, but unfortunately that's what I saw in this game, and I've seen it in other games too. New York Jets, the same with Zach Wilson, and then the other quarterback. They used to put him just like 2 or 3 plays in the game, and that can definitely kill your motivation. So we got to be mindful of that if you're a coach or mentor. All right. So now that we took care of the neuroanatomy and we looked at what happens in terms of what gives you that motivation for drive, we're going to look into ways of enhancing the intrinsic motivation. And again, we want to have that balance with our athletes where we're not consistently getting them used to that immediate reward, because you're not always going to have that immediate reward. But it takes time to get to where we want to go to. And for that, we got to learn what motivates them and what their intrinsic motivation is. So I'm going to give you some tips, right? So enhanced intrinsic motivation in young athletes is crucial um, for their development, enjoyment of the sport, and long-term success. And this is not only applicable to sports; you can apply it to career development as well. So let's look at some ways to enhance your intrinsic motivation. So for one, we got to learn what our athletes' personal interest and enjoyment is. What does that entail? So if you encourage athletes to engage in activities they genuinely enjoy, it helps them find that satisfaction in their training and competition. So it can be hard, but if we learn about our athletes, we can start making the training to a degree on waking up that intrinsic motivation for them. Number two, skill mastery. So provide opportunities for skill development. That'll definitely boost their confidence, and you can do it step by step. Right, set them up for success. If you set them up for success, taking it step by step, when they complete step one, they're going to feel motivated because they achieved it. But if you set them up for failure by giving them complex um, drills where it confuses them and they don't understand, they're going to lose that confidence. Number three, autonomy. So if you allow your athletes to make choices regarding training techniques and goals, that can increase their sense of ownership and motivation. It doesn't mean that you have to conduct your training based on what they like, but getting their feedback, it empowers them and it makes them feel like they're actually being part of the plan of execution. So things like, what do you think if we practice these kind of runs and things like that, and they'll give you the feedback. Four, positive reinforcement. So if you offer constructive feedback and you celebrate progress, you can reinforce an athlete's dedication to the improvement and help them appreciate their efforts. Right. So again, step by step. If you see one of your athletes is feeling down because they perform poorly in the game, you don't want to go there and kick them, right? You want to give that constructive feedback. Celebrate the progress. In other words, just focus on the positive at that particular moment. An athlete knows when they're underperforming. So it's not going to benefit them or you, if you're a coach or a mentor, to bring up their faults or their shortcomings. At that moment in time, if they're going through that emotion of losing a game or knowing that they underperform, or even if they win a game but they miss 4 or 5 field goals, they know they underperformed, right? You want to focus on the positive ones, and then later, when everything is calm, then you can speak to them about things that they can improve. Five, goal setting. You encourage young athletes to set personal, achievable goals, can provide them with a sense of purpose and direction, and enhance their motivation to engage in their sport. Okay, this athlete that they gotta be able to make a 40-yard dash in 3.5 seconds, right? Set a goal, 7 seconds. All right, 6 seconds. Okay, 5 seconds, and then eventually, step by step, set them up for success. And what is the other one? Let's see. Yeah. So those are 5 tips that I can share with you in how to enhance the intrinsic motivation for those young athletes. And with that being said, this is basically the wrap up of this topic. It's understanding what happens in the brain in terms of motivation, and also taking that information that I've given you about what happens in the brain and how it translates into behavior, and utilizing that information for practical purposes. Because it's not just about learning what the brain does or how it responds, it's what do you do with that information now? You are a coach or a mentor, right? Or a trainer. What do you do with this information? How do you apply it? So those 5 tips that I just gave you basically encompass everything that we've spoken about, so that you can put it into practice. There are many other things that we can come up with in terms of how to enhance the intrinsic motivation, but I think that these 5 that I covered are some of the most important ones in order to build the confidence in those athletes. Can't hear you.
Thank you so much, Johan, for being on the show. Awesome job, man. We're going to have you back to go over more of this information. I mean, all of it is so important to athletes, and I know that you have a wealth of information to give us. So we're definitely going to have to do another show.
Yeah, definitely, man. Definitely. It's about getting this information, just put it into practice. That's my goal in neuroscience, taking all the research and studies, and just, bring it down for practical purposes.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, we will be back next Wednesday. Have a wonderful rest of your week and weekend, and we will see you next week. Take care.
Thank you all. Have a good day.
Thanks for watching Circle Back to You podcast. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. See you next week.